Hello, traveler. My name is Virgil, and this is Literally Books, and today I want to talk about Robert Heinlein's Have Spacesuit Will Travel and Larry Niven's Ringworld. Have Spacesuit Will Travel and Ringworld have an alien illustration in Barlowe's guide, and the challenge is roughly to read all of the stories that are mentioned in Barlowe's guide in a reasonable amount of time. Barlowe's guide is a book of illustrations that tries to remain faithful to the descriptions that writers of science fiction before 1979 put around aliens or extraterrestrials in their books. Larry Niven's Ringworld was published in 1970. It won a Nebula in that same year and a Hugo and a Lux Award in 1971. Set in Larry Niven's known space universe, humans have adopted space travel. Life can be extended by booster spice. Overpopulation by birth is harnessed by a lottery, and aliens can be found at the local space bar. Louis Wu celebrates his 200th birthday and wanders away from the party to encounter Nessus, a puppeteer, a Pearson's puppeteer. Nessus convinces Louis to travel to a dangerous but adventurous place, seeing that Louis is a bit jaded with his current life. They pick up Speaker to Animals, later just Speaker, a Gazenti, and Louis meets Tila Brown, the granddaughter of an old flame of his. Tila and Louis hit it off and shack up. All of them pile into Nessus's spaceship, the Lying Bastard, that can travel faster than any human or Kazenti ship, and after some difficulties they end up at Nessus's homeworld. There they learn they are to explore the mysterious superstructure of the Ringworld. A ringworld, or the Ringworld in this case, is a massive superstructure, much like a Dyson sphere. It is a literal ring encircling a star. The band is about 10 miles wide, and it is about 186 million miles in diameter. The inner surface of the ring is habitable. During the exploration of the Ringworld by Louis and the crew of the Lying Bastard, we get discussions about the Ringworld's day-night cycle, its weather, how it protects itself from space debris, and what caused its current state. And now let's briefly go over Robert Heinlein's Have Spacesuit Will Travel. Robert Heinlein's Have Spacesuit Will Travel was published in 1958 after being serialized in the same year. It was nominated for a Hugo and won a Sequoia Children's Award in 1959. The story follows young Kip, who dreams of going to the moon where humanity has a base. But the trip is expensive, and Kip has to consider what he wants to do after high school. Kip hears about a contest put on by Skyway Soap, whose grand prize is an all-expenses-paid trip to the moon. Kip spends considerable time sending entries into the contest, but he doesn't win. Instead, he wins a sort of booby prize, a spacesuit, a used spacesuit. But the company offers to buy it back for $500, which will go a long way towards funding Kip's college tuition for a semester. But Kip gets fascinated with the inner workings of the suit and fixes it up to space-ready conditions. With the return deadline for the suit looming, Kip decides to do a full moonwalk simulation one night. While testing out the suit's radio, he gets a request for landing coordinates and radios in a flying saucer to land right in front of him. As a strange alien comes out of the ship, Kip is knocked unconscious, only to awaken imprisoned with Pee-wee, a 12-year-old girl whose father is a man of great importance. Ringworld has a sense of being a pulp adventure story. It has a strange sort of place that it holds. It's science fiction, but it borrows a lot of tropes or mood from pulp adventure stories. We have weird aliens, forgotten technology, ancient structures, primitive cultures interacting with modern ones, and all that is blended with hard sci-fi musings on the function of Ringworld itself. The combination makes for pretty fun reading, and those sort of analytical bits kind of fill in the gap between the action. And next we have Larry Niven's Pearson's Puppeteer. It's actually, that's kind of a weird thing too, that like there's this other sentient race that humans encounter, and they're puppeteers, what they call them. But they also call them Pearson's puppeteers, which is like the kind of a thing you would name an animal that somebody like Explorer would discover. I think it's a little weird. There's definitely a sense in Ringworld too of like this sort of condescending tone towards other aliens by Louis, and I assume that because Louis is really the only human that we really get to interact with a whole lot, that it's sort of like a human perspective in general. That's kind of the perspective we get, is sort of like this, oh, aliens, whatever. You know, the Pearson's Puppeteers, what does this guy want? What does this what does this weirdo want from me? You know, it's kind of like that perspective, which is a little strange to take, but I don't know. I guess it works, I guess, or it sort of works. But this is actually one of, I think, my favorite illustrations for the extraterrestrials in this guide is the Pearson's Puppeteer, or just the Puppeteer as it's called here. And you get this great two-headed illustration of a puppeteer, and you get some detail here showing the nubs that are around their mouth, and then you see the puppeteers are also like very cowardly. I think they talk about the puppeteers being like genetically cowardly because they're herd animals, which there's a lot of leaning on that too, which, okay, that's part of their unusual alienness, right? Okay, that's fine. But I love that the puppeteers have these sort of nubs around their mouths, that their heads double as hands. I just really like that. They only have one brain and only one personality, even though there's two heads. I really like, it's just a weird, exotic alien, really creative and interesting. One of my absolute favorite illustrations from Barlowe's guide. A great story and a great illustration. In fact, I don't know why I said in fact. I shouldn't have. I was going to say it was something was wrong. Have Spacesuit Will Travel, like I said, was published originally in 3 parts. And it does have 3 distinct, almost like acts or sort of moods to it that it goes through. The first one is definitely sort of a, maybe not entirely exciting, but an interesting look at the inner workings of a spacesuit. And Kip's sort of like struggle to win that trip, which he fails to, getting this suit and then fixing it up and discovering it. And that may not sound like very exciting reading, but it actually is quite enjoyable. The second is pure adventure, tempered by hard science fiction. You could kind of think of it being something like Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island or something like that sense of adventure, but with a very strong scientific groundwork laid out for us. And where all that analysis and look at the suit really pays off as we get to see the suit in action. And the third part takes place in Vegan space, where Kip and Pee-wee have to defend humanity to a galactic council. Both of these are great, classic, hard science fiction novels. They're exciting, exotic, mysterious, and sometimes funny. The Vegan from Have Spacesuit Will Travel. And I'm going to say it's a little silly. I actually like the illustration from the cover of this version of the book that I got. And when I bought it, I didn't know that the mother thing, who is the alien at the bottom there, who's kind of like a raccoon look, I didn't know that the picture was cut off. I'm a little annoyed that it was. I actually kind of prefer the cover image on that book to Barlowe's illustration, but I do like Barlowe's illustration. And that's of the Vegan here. And we get it's kind of like a bush baby type thing going on. And we get sort of a silhouette of the mother thing, or the Vegan here. And I think they're considered to be marsupials. And Barlowe does a little detail illustration there about the nictating membrane of their eyes. I didn't take notes on the mother thing's description, so I can't verify that one is a whole lot more accurate than the other. Much more of a raccoon look. And I thought that was a lot cooler look. Ringworld has a definite sense of being something kind of like the original series of Star Trek, or maybe somewhere between the original series and Next Generation. Humanity has explored the stars, and they've done a lot of colonization, but there's still a great deal of mystery out there in space, a lot of undiscovered things, a lot of things that have been forgotten. The book itself is also amazingly influential. I mean, I can make the rather obvious comparison to Ringworld and Halo, for example. A more recent episode of the Book of Boba Fett, although I don't know how recent that is, featured a smaller version of Ringworld. At least that's what Wikipedia tells me. I mean, that's where I got that from. So, okay, that's what Wikipedia, and somebody could have lied. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's true. The tone that Niven takes with Ringworld, where it's like, he somewhat has like kind of a dry humor that kind of runs throughout it, and this sort of like these exotic, sort of very pulpy sort of scenarios and things happening with aliens are all tempered with this hard sci-fi skin that he puts over the top of them. They give it some credibility. I do want to mention also that Ringworld has some rather egregious sexism, beyond what I think is tolerable for a book that's 50 years old from the 1970s. I'll talk about it later, but it's important that you know. Have Spacesuit Will Travel is pure boys' adventure fiction. It's such a joy to read. So much fun. I think it can go beyond being just a boy's adventure to just a great adventure story for kids. That is, if you don't have a problem getting past the sort of aw shucks and sort of leave it to beaver sort of dialogue that Heinlein really puts in pretty strong here. I think that's actually kind of, from what I've read, pretty common for him. It has a very like 50s TV sort of feel to some of the stuff sometimes. That said, Heinlein, I've never been bored in a Heinlein book, even if I was a little bit irritated by some of the portrayals of females sometimes. I don't think there's a problem so much in this book, but in some other books there have been. But this book is just great. It's just pure adventure, fun, and a really, really interesting look at the science behind it, especially the spacesuit. And I think it's important to mention, too, that Heinlein was a engineer for a high-altitude spacesuit company, and so a lot of the things that he worked on and knew about, he put into this book. This was the last juvenile or young adult novel that Heinlein wrote. He wrote another story after this that was supposed to get published as juvenile fiction, and the publisher rejected it. Heinlein left that publisher and went to someone else. That novel was Starship Troopers. And like so much of Heinlein's work, there's always this pervading message, and here it's one of diligence and hard work and persistence at something that you're interested in or that you want, and that even if you don't get that thing, that you're going to get something out of it, even if the results are not exactly what you expected. And I really enjoy that about Heinlein's fiction. I think it's really well done here. So Ringworld for me is a 7. Just a great book, really enjoyable. Definitely get a sense when you're reading Ringworld that there's more to explore and there's more to see, and you want to go back and uncover those mysteries that you didn't get to look at closely enough. It's like a really great movie that you saw when you were young, and you go back and rewatch it and it still holds up, and you just kind of realize like this is as good as I remember it being. And that's what the feeling for Ringworld is. And Have Spacesuit Will Travel is an 8 for me. It's a great introduction to Heinlein. It's a great introduction to hard science fiction. It's really just a great introduction to science fiction for somebody who wants to try it and just doesn't know where to start. The characters here feel real, enthusiastic, and excited and intelligent, but they're not sort of like bulletproof. And they're not sort of so righteous in their beliefs, and they don't kind of like override adults. I want to talk about the sexism that was in Ringworld. I really didn't want to. I really didn't want to talk about it. I thought about whether I really needed to talk about it, and I really can't get away from it. When I went back for this reread, I thought, whew, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely like, man, and I started making a list. And I'm like, oh yeah, this wasn't so cool. I'm like, oh, that wasn't so cool. And I'm sure there's stuff I forgot. I'm going to read off a list of crimes. That's how I labeled it. I don't think it's really crimes, but things that can make you understand that it's above and beyond what I think would be acceptable for fiction of its era. Okay, Tila, who is the female lead for most of the book. First of all, Tila is super young compared to Louis. Louis, like I said, is 200 years old. Tila is like, I don't know, she's like early 20s, I think. So in addition to her being significantly younger, and he be the older, more experienced man, and she's the young, nubile woman, right? There's also this feeling of like her, even though she's not technically in the book, of her being sort of like barely legal, and that's kind of like ick. She is the granddaughter of one of Louis's old lovers, who he really had a thing for, and he never kind of like got it reciprocated, and she kind of looks like her. Double yuck. Tila is the main female character for most of the book, and she's just a plot device, which is unfortunate. We're just going to put that as unfortunate. She is determined to be genetically lucky, like that's a characteristic that you can develop, which is an interesting idea. It's just that Tila gets saddled with that, and she really has nothing else going on. She causes problems just by being around because of her luck, because she's so lucky. Bad things happen to other people. And so there's a sense of like, oh, we brought a woman along and she's bad luck. That literally is like an old like like sailing, like ship motif, like bringing a woman on board is bad luck. So the first chance she abandons Louis, that's also chalked up to her luck, and I can kind of see that. I mean, some of this stuff with her luck, I can kind of say, okay, we can kind of let this go. That one's not so bad, but it is just sort of like she seems very flighty in that sense, right? She's also described as being sort of at the mercy of her luck and not really maybe having free will. And she is so naive and has experienced so little discomfort because of her luck. She doesn't even understand things like pain. Like she doesn't, like literally doesn't understand pain. And that's just, I'm not crazy about that. And then we get Prill. Sort of like captures the other characters briefly, and Nessus sort of was able to negotiate their freedom. We discovered that Prill was part of a merchant ship that was trading with the Ringworld while it was still active, and her crew got stuck on the Ringworld. So Louis and Nessus are discussing Prill, and Nessus tells Louis that she was one of only a few women who were on the ship, and Louis' sort of response is, well, then it's obvious what her profession is. Yeah, so Prill is a space prostitute. She doesn't exactly speak the same language as Louis, which is understandable, but what she ends up speaking is sort of like a broken English, which makes her seem less intelligent. And then she really only knows how to interact or convince men through sex. That's the only way she really knows how to exert her influence on someone. And I didn't even mention the fact that the Kzinti females are not even sentient. The Kzinti are all sentient humanoid tiger type people, and the females are just basically animals. So no one of those things individually is horrible. Exactly. Maybe. These are decisions that were made in this book when it was written. These weren't like, oh, these things added up to a picture that isn't very flattering. I feel like these are all a lot of decisions. I'm still recommending the book. I'm going to try and explain why. Sometimes we have to read something that we maybe don't love and maybe we don't even like, but that we're glad to have done it. You don't have to really love the book. You don't even have to like the book. But I think that if you give it a chance and read it, you'll be glad to have read it. I think it's an important thing to do, especially when looking at some of this older stuff that maybe isn't a perfect fit. They then think, well, I'm doing this for fun. Why should I have to weather something? I think there's value in it. I really do. I think there's value even if you end up reading this book and you don't like it. I'm hoping that you'll read it and you'll find good things in there and you'll say, well, I didn't love everything. I can like this part. And I think if you can separate the bad from the good and enjoy the good parts and just sort of weather the bad stuff, I don't think you'll regret reading the book. That may not be true for everyone, but I think it's worth a try. And I think that skill, developing that skill, the enduring something that is necessary to understand its point of view is important. Even if you only read it for no other reason, so that you can comment on the fact that it is sexist and not sort of say, well, I heard that it was, but I haven't read it myself. It sort of undermines your credibility. I think that there's a lot of good reasons to read Ringworld, and I don't know why that sentence was so hard to say, but I had to say it 3 or 4 times. I think if you like older science fiction, I think you can get through this. And I do think that it's out of place as well. So if there's any detractors who say, I think it's unfair to judge them, it was different time. You know what? There's writers who are earlier than this, significantly earlier than this, that don't do that sort of thing with their female characters. In fact, their female characters are much more empowered. Now, I'm not saying that they have to be empowered characters or they have to be a certain way or else it's completely dismissible. I don't believe that. I enjoy a strong female character. In fact, some of my absolute favorite characters in all of fiction are strong female characters. I hope that you'll give Ringworld a try and you'll be glad to have done it. Some of Heinlein's work is like that too. Not this book. Actually, the reason that I created this channel was a Heinlein book that I really had a strong negative reaction to. At some point, I guess I should do a video on that. What upsets me the most about that book is that it was a neat story. I enjoyed the story. There was a lot of things to like about that book. A lot of good Heinlein writing. And just some some stuff that really irritated the hell out of me about one of the female characters there. Robert Heinlein's Have Spacesuit Will Travel and Larry Niven's Ringworld. Both of them excellent books, worth your time. I think you can say about both those books that you'd be glad to have read them. My name is Virgil. This is Literally Books. Please like and subscribe if that's something that you physically think you could do. I think you could do it. I appreciate it if you do it. I appreciate it if you just made it this far, honestly. It means a lot to me. Thanks. You keep me going, whoever you are, and I don't have a great way to sign out. Keep your helmets screwed on tight. See you later. You don't have to look much farther than just Halo, for example, or an episode in the recent Diaries of Boba Fett. Is that right? Is that right? The Boba Fett had diaries? Book of Boba Fett. I like Diaries of Boba Fett. I think it seems better. Diaries of Boba Fett? Yeah. What if it was like Dear Diary? You have to edit that out. My name is Virgil. This is Literally Books. You probably should already know that by this point, because I don't know why you would start at the end of the video, but I'm going to say it again, because maybe you forgot. And now I can remind you. That's it. I don't have anything funny to say. I don't. No. I have nothing funny to say. There's nothing funny about science fiction.